I'm going to introduce our panelists today, and then we will have Jackie lead us in the moderation of this session. So we will begin. Again, welcome everyone as everyone's trickling in. We're really happy to have you here and to be part of this panel. So I'll begin. Welcome to the Pamela Howard Forum on Crisis Reporting. I'm Devin, the editorial and community manager at IJNet. We're a project of the International Center for Journalists, bringing resources to journalists around the world. I'm excited to bring you on our first IJNet Forum panel today as we talk about covering the Israel-Hamas conflict and war. Since the October 7 Hamas attacks in Israel 6 months ago and the start of the Israeli bombing campaign and ground invasion of Gaza, it has created a humanitarian crisis for Palestinians that continues to this day. The world's eyes have been fixed on the war in Gaza. It's a conflict that has been especially deadly for journalists, with nearly 100 journalists and media workers, 92 of them Palestinian, killed in the conflict, the majority from Israeli airstrikes, and what the Committee to Protect Journalists calls the deadliest period for journalists that is ever recorded. Today, we're going to ask, how can journalists, Israeli, Palestinian, and international journalists, cover this conflict ethically and accurately? What challenges and barriers do they face in doing so? How does censorship, self-censorship, and disinformation factor into the work they do? We're partnering with the Media Diversity Institute today to bring this panel to you to discuss these questions and more. So I'm going to introduce our panel. I'd like to start with our moderator, Jackie Leiden. Jackie is an award-winning writer and was a host and correspondent for NPR for 34 years. She covered the Middle East between 1990 and 2007, including the First and Second Gulf Wars, the war in Afghanistan, and Israel-Palestine. She is a winner of the Gracie Prize from American Women in Radio TV and the DuPont Columbia. She is also a member of the National Steering Committee of Writers for Democratic Action, which values literary freedom, opposes book bans, and promotes the First Amendment in the US. Our first panelist is Kulsum Bissarat. She's the editor-in-chief of Plus 972 magazine, an independent news outlet run by a group of Palestinian and Israeli journalists with a mission to provide in-depth reporting, analysis, and opinions from the ground in Israel-Palestine. Bissarat is an expert on media, communications, and international cooperation, with over 20 years of experience with the European Union and at leading international news outlets. She is also a Palestinian citizen of Israel, living in Haifa. Our second panelist is Oren Persisco. He's a staff writer at the Seventh Eye, an independent Israeli website devoted to journalism and freedom of speech. Since joining in 2007, Persisco has extensively covered the Israeli media landscape, focusing on exposing injustices of journalistic malpractice, external influences on news reporting, and biased portrayals of Palestinians, among other topics. From 2017 onwards, he has provided thorough coverage of the legal proceedings involving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli media publishers. In 2023, Persisco, along with two colleagues, was honored with the Sokolov Award, Israel's prestigious journalism award. Finally, our third panelist is Ryan Offman, a key founder and current executive director of the Palestinian Media Network Ma'an, a nonprofit media organization dedicated to strengthening independent Palestinian media to promote the development of democracy and human rights in Palestine. One of the network's main projects is the Ma'an News Agency, one of the most visited websites in the Palestinian territory, which provides round-the-clock local, regional, and international news. We have a question and answer segment at the end of this session, so please add your comments to the Q&A section, and selected questions will be asked to the moderators at the end of the panel. Everyone, thank you for joining again. Jackie, I will let you begin.
Thank you, Devin. It really is an honor and privilege to be with these esteemed colleagues today who are totally in the trenches. And of course, that's where journalists want to be when something like this is going on, and that is being prevented in several ways, which we'll be discussing here. Just a note, I would like to think about the journalists killed mentioned in the CPJ report and really dedicate today's discussion to them. As you said, 92 of them Palestinian, but all of them, of course, necessary. Let's begin with you, Oren, if you would, and go to Israel, where you are, and talk about not only your efforts to report, but where things are now, the reaction perhaps, just to have everyone on the same page today, to President Biden's statement yesterday that offensive weaponry would be suspended in the event of an incursion into Gaza.
Hi, hello everybody. Thanks for having me here. The last update that I saw was that Prime Minister Netanyahu retweeted a speech that he had a few days ago where he said that if necessary, Israel will fight alone. So that's the response of the Israeli government so far.
So how have things changed for you since October the 7th in terms of what Seventh Eye is doing. And I think everyone wonders if the Israeli public sees what we see. You assume that it's accessible. Is it?
Well, we write about the media, not really about the reality, but how the reality is perceived through the media. And although Israel is not a dictatorship like Russia, and there's no real block of social networks. You can go to the New York Times or whatever and learn what's going on. There's a lot of self-censorship and choices that journalists in Israel do that prevents a lot of information from reaching Israeli public. And when I'm talking about Israeli media, I'm talking about mainstream Israeli media, not Haaretz or 972 or specific journalists who are more left-leaning. But to speak broadly about Israeli mainstream media outlets, what you see is mostly Israeli Jewish victims of the war, the victimhood of Israelis. If you see Gaza, there's not a lot about the human cost over there, the tragedy. I'm not talking about human stories, magazines about children being hurt or dying. I'm just even talking about the information, the numbers, the threat of the humanitarian crisis. I actually saw just a couple of weeks ago an article in Israel-Hayom, the most read Israeli newspaper, that there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The stores are full. There's falafel, there's shawarma. There's a lack of people to distribute the huge amounts of food that Israel is allowing inside. And that's extreme. Usually you just don't see any reporting about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, or you see questioning the reports from the UN and other agencies. This was an extreme example of just refuting it and saying there is no problem. The usual tendency is just not to report it.
Have there been sanctions against journalists like you who tried to report on what is going on? I mean, I'm going to get to a question about the Knesset and its new law in a moment, but just already, you mentioned self-censorship.
Yeah, but when I mentioned self-censorship, there were reporters that were afraid to speak Arabic on the street, whether they were from Al Jazeera or BBC Arabic, because people walking by would shout at them or threaten them. But most of the self-censorship that I was talking about was from Israeli Jewish reporters reporting in Hebrew, the news. And you have to remember that Israeli journalists are part of the Israeli society, and the Israeli society is very much in a post-traumatic state and very much devoted, the attention is still very much devoted to what happened on October 7th and the situation with the hostages there. And reporters were either in the military or their sons are fighting in Gaza. They're part of the society. And as part of the Israeli society, they prefer to report about things that won't hurt the war effort, so to say, and not report about anything that could dismorale the viewers or hurt the war effort. They would say we are, first of all, Israelis, and second, journalists. So that's most of the self-censorship that I was talking about.
All right, thank you. That does help elucidate things. We'll come back to you. Want to welcome Rahed Othman and ask you how things have changed for you. And, we were talking earlier a bit about the negotiations. Before we talk about the difficulties that you have faced, which I know are considerable, could you just update us on where the negotiations are when it comes to Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians and trying to end this somehow?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me with you today. And the last update now that everybody left Cairo, the Hamas negotiators go back to Qatar, and the Israeli negotiators come back to Tel Aviv, and even the Americans left. Everybody report that the negotiation is so hard, and they come back, each of them, to have a feedback from their people or from their head ministries or whatever. So that's the last thing.
Thank you, Rod. So I'd really like to talk to you about, you, I'm sure, have lost colleagues in this war. The Israeli Knesset just passed a law recently that grants senior Israeli ministers the authority to shut down foreign news agencies, which they're referring to Al Jazeera as, and well, and it is. And then sometimes tragedy needs a face, and I just want to recall Hamza al-Dakhtu, who was the son of the bureau chief at Al Jazeera, was killed. What has happened to your reporting network since October the 7th?
Yeah, I just, there is actually one of the difficulties that there was a big targeting to the journalists in general and to their families. And if we want to speak about figures, it's like 136. This is the syndicate, the journalist syndicate just published 2 days ago. And there is more than 77 houses has been bombed, and they're for the journalists. Mainly all the radio stations are closed, 100%. 86 office of the journalist has been damaged. A lot of families of the journalists had been killed. One of the journalists, he lost 20 of his family in bombing. There is another journalist who still from 4 months, she and her family under her house. Nobody can reach that house. That's in general. But if you want to speak exactly to Ma'an, we have 4 people working for us in Gaza. And these 4, since the beginning of war, some of them, we don't have even any connection with him. He is our photographer. First of all, our office has been bombed the second day of the war, in the 8th of October. Not only our office, but our office was in one of the towers of Gaza. A few of these towers has been a few of this towers has been bombed in the first day. So one of that offices is our office, and we lose everything: our equipment, our safety jackets, our history there, our servers, everything in that building. We couldn't take anything. So the 4 journalists that we have, one of them is the photographer. Since 7th of October until now, we don't know anything about him. He's still in Gaza. He's still in the north of Gaza, if you want. He lives in Shuja'iyya. And unfortunately, we had a lot of bad stories about Shuja'iyya, that it's completely damaged. But he's still alive. His name does not mentioned in the killed journalist. The other 2 women, actually, that we have, one of them, if I will use the names, it's better. Rawan al-Surani. Rawan al-Surani, she used to live in Al-Rimal, very high class area. And this area has been demolished totally. She got her apartment a year ago or something like that. Now she is living in a camp between Rafah and Khan Yunis. And actually, she's a secular journalist, so she had to wear a hijab today because she lived in the street, actually. And I don't know if you can imagine what's the meaning of that. There is no bathrooms, there is no showers, there is nothing. They just go to a few mosques that kept to public bathrooms, and the people who know the mosque bathrooms, it's just to wash your hands and to have al wudu, which is, there is nothing much there. And the third one, Fida has been moved many times. Fida Hillis, and she's now going back to Lebrej after she was in Rafah a week ago, and she go back also to Lebrej in the middle of Gaza Strip. And sometimes we lose her for 2 days, 3 days, and she come back and just for voice messages from there. The most person who is the head of the office, who is in touch in every day, Imad live in Gaza, and he moved to Khan Yunis. Then now he moved to Rafah. Imad lose 28 of his family. Even his family is small. 5 of them is his sister and her children. He had to use the VIB company to send his children to Egypt, and he had to pay $26,000 for that. We try to help him a little bit with money. Even transferring money to Gaza is very hard. No banks, nothing. And if he want to transfer the money immediately to his children, he will lose around 20% of that. Imad live in a tent for journalists with other 2 colleagues in front of a hospital. And he spent most of his time in the hospital to report for us about daily news, what's happening there. So mainly, of course, he don't have a bathroom, he don't have clothes, he don't have anything. And from time to time, he's waiting now. He said, we are in block 3 in Rafah. The Israeli forces now ask block 1 to leave. And when they start to ask block 2 to leave, you will start moving. But until that moment, he is reporting away from his family. Of course, his house is damaged, not completely. He still have a part of it. His car, he loses his car. And he's doing his work only by phone, which is not, unfortunately, not working all the time. Most of the time, there is no internet, there is no coverage for the phones.
Okay.
So this is in general what's happened to my staff there.
It's absolutely devastating. Absolutely. It just almost makes it impossible. What other barriers? What is the your magazine Plus 972 able to do in the face of these kinds of impediments, annihilations, and difficulties, Hasu?
Thank you, Jackie. It's great to be here with Oren and Raed. I would like to just remind everyone of who is Plus 972 magazine. So
Please do.
we were founded in 2010, like 14 years ago. We are an independent, non-profit digital magazine run by Palestinian and Israeli journalists. Our mission is to provide in-depth reporting, investigations, analysis, and opinions from the ground in Israel-Palestine. We are a very small binational team with a huge network of contributors, journalists, scholars, researchers, and activists. And we believe that, we are small, but we have an extraordinary impact, and we're all united in our values of equity, justice, and freedom of information. Our journalism model is very unique, and our site cannot be, taken for granted, as we, work to spotlight the people and the communities working to oppose occupation and apartheid, and that showcases perspectives that are often overlooked or marginalized in mainstream media. We shed light on the complexities of life in Israel-Palestine. We provide crucial context to news events, and we challenge the status quo with honesty, accuracy, and accountability. We try not to keep repeating the same news cycle. We really aim to break it. and to reimagine what is possible in order to guarantee equity and justice for all communities living between the river and the sea. We have been doing this work for 14 years, and we make sure to persist not only during times of war. Since October 7, the work has been much more difficult and more challenging. From Gaza in particular, we have a group of freelance journalists, and their situation is very similar to what Raed just mentioned. Even in their reportings on Plus 972 magazine, they bravely shared their stories on the daily struggle to provide food, water, shelter, and care for their families and young children, while also trying to report the news. Working with them is like the most challenging thing I have ever done in my career, but it's also the most inspiring one. I really don't know how they can do the work while being, in Gaza, non-stop, bombardment and attack on their cities and towns and camps right now. 3 of our journalists have left Gaza in the last couple of weeks, also through this VIP company. And they're still reporting from Cairo because, they left Gaza, but they're still haunted by the war, as their, families and friends and the place that they, know and they have left is being, still under attack. One of our journalists, Ibtisam Mahdi, is now living in a tent with her 2 children in Khan Yunis, and also operating from a mobile, which is really difficult for her and for us. That is her 5th place. She moved from Gaza City to Shati refugee camp, to Khan Yunis, to Deir al-Balah, and now in Khan Yunis again. For us at 972, one of the most important things during this war was to report from Gaza, but by journalists from Gaza, and not to collect information and write it from somewhere in Haifa or Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, but to have the byline coming out from Gaza, giving the agency to the journalists on the ground who know best what is happening, and they can report on it. And I think they have been doing an amazing job. I think it's also worth mentioning, the telecommunication and the internet problems, which really makes the work much more harder. Also for us sitting here, where our life is a bit more comfortable, fact checking, accuracy. Sometimes it takes ages to get a story out on 972 because we lost contact with the journalist, and we need to verify a few things, to confirm, to check. It's also important to mention the journalists who were arrested by the Israeli authorities since October 7th. More than 100 journalists were arrested, mainly from Gaza, but also from the West Bank. 44 are still in Israeli jails, and nobody knows much about them. Lawyers cannot see them. From the little we know, we heard that the investigations and the interrogations are about their work, about their journalistic work, about their social media posts. So their work is being investigated.
Let's just pause on that for just a moment, because you've all described in different ways a range from, actual attacks, internet outages, slain colleagues and their families, people who are targeted because of what they've reported, being afraid to speak Arabic on the street. Oren, how do you try to give sense to those who are most affected? How can you report on Palestinians given these barricades? And what do your readers want to know about most?
Well, unfortunately, Israel does not allow journalists to enter Gaza, international journalists. The Foreign Press Association appealed to Israeli High Court demanding that they will be allowed to enter Gaza. I think that's the most, that's the biggest problem.
Mhm.
The court accepted the IDF's position that it would endanger the Israeli forces fighting there, and the foreign journalists were only allowed to enter Gaza embedded with Israeli military. It's very difficult when you're embedded to report accurately about what's going on. And obviously, it's difficult to interview a citizen when your back is filled with armed soldiers, right? You can't really communicate the way that you wished you could as a journalist. Egypt has not allowed foreign journalists to enter through Rafah until just a few days ago, Israel captured the border in Rafah. For the very long months, there was no foreign journalists entering there, except one who also entered with embedded in a humanitarian convoy and was able to show a bit about what's going on in a hospital nearby. So I would say that's the biggest problem. You can't really see with your own eyes what's going on. The other problem is that Palestinian journalists inside Gaza have, like was mentioned before, a lot of problems getting information out. You also need to remind yourself that they are living under Hamas, which is a brutal regime for its dissidents. You are not allowed to openly criticize Hamas inside Gaza, and reporters know that and are afraid. So it's also, even though of course, they're very brave and do the most they can to report what's going on, but you need to remind yourself that they have a limited freedom of expression. I think my readers are most interested in the difficulties that Israeli journalists face, which are, there's nothing to compare with what's going on in Gaza. But we, for example, reported extensively about the Al Jazeera ban. I was the only journalist in the courtroom where the judge viewed the order to shut down Al Jazeera, and that shows you the lack of interest that Israeli journalists have in what's going on with Al Jazeera. They don't see them as colleagues or even a propaganda tool, but really a part of the terror mechanism, like they were like the Israeli government. And that's very frightening because the moment the government has the power to shut down media outlet because of the content that they publish, it's a very slippery slope. Right now, the law doesn't allow the government to shut down Israeli outlets, but the parliament members who drafted the law wanted that in. There was a discussion, and the Ministry of Justice fought that and managed to limit the ban to foreign media outlets that are threatening the security of the State of Israel. But the head of the committee that discussed the law, when they finally voted on it, they said, let's vote on this now. We'll have our foot in. And when we have to amend the law, we'll amend the law. So the first step is already here. The Minister of Communication has the authority in some instances to shut down a media outlet. And from here, they can make it Israeli outlets that are not considered a threat to security, but just incite violence for an entire year and not 45 days like the current warrant. So there is a narrowing of the space for dissent voice in Israel. for personal citizens and also for media outlets.
For any of you, I'm interested. So the ability by you talked about the repression of journalists by both the Israeli government and Hamas. What is the language that journalists are sometimes in Hebrew? I mean, I read that at times, especially when things have come to investigation and people have been killed, journalists can be labeled terrorists and not given the dignity of even their work. Has that been happening? Would any of you like to comment on that?
Well, there were certain instances where the IDF claimed that some of the journalists were working as active militant terrorist personnel of Hamas or Islamic Jihad. And they also presented some proof that was not very convincing to people who know how these sorts of material usually looks like. But I think the main sentiment is that by amplifying Hamas messages, you are part of Hamas, and a lot of people in Israel consider the entire Hamas government, not just the military forces, a terrorist organization, and therefore if you work for Al-Aqsa channel, which is an official Hamas channel in Gaza, then you're a terrorist.
Yeah, so you're targeted. Rod, it's remarkable that, are you able to get any news inside the Gaza Strip that you consider reliable out at all? Given what you told us about your colleagues, it's so profound that it makes me wonder what, if anything, you are receiving and what you're most interested in learning about.
Yes, of course, we can get to the news. We long experience organization, and our staff had been trained well to cover the conflict very well. It's not the first, maybe it's the first identify as a war, but it's not the first time that there is attack in or fighting in Gaza. We have in 2008, 2012, 2014, and just 2-3 months, there was a few days of this. We get the news from there, and for sure we don't, of course, there is a pressure sometimes, of course, but in general, we don't lie in the news because it's very easy to catch you in the lying. And for example, we have an extreme of fake news that started since the war until now, and it has to bring investigators, journalism to do about that. I can mention many stories. Shifa Hospital, Al-Ma'madani Hospital, who bombed the Ma'madani Hospital. Even not only the Israeli government, also the American government share that. Killing the kids, raping the women, involving of you and in the war personally, that they are part of the attack. There is hundreds of stories, and sometimes about raping women. The report that even the Israeli journalists themselves said, hey, stop. These 2 girls that you mentioned in the report has been killed in the 7th of October. It's how you make interview with killed people. So there is a lot of fake news that coming from actually mainly from the Israeli side.
Yeah.
And they couldn't approve anything. They speak about something, and still until today, they speak about something. So you have to double check, triple check, third check, and you go to, from our side, because of the limitation of movement, sometimes limitation of information, limitation of communication, we can't get the news in the right time. But we have here in the Palestinian side more openly, actually. And for example, in Ma'an and other media, in Palestinian media, we translate everything that the Israeli speak about their situation, about the effect of the war to the Palestinian public. We even
Which
have
sources do you use? You said you
excuse me?
translated. Which sources do you use?
We use all the sources. يعني يدوت أهرنوت, معاريف, هآرتس, Jerusalem Post, 972, everyone. 4040, the military sources, every source in Israel, it's in our edit room, and we translate immediately what they publish. If they said something, we translate that. Of course, later on we go with, unfortunately, in the Israeli media, even if there is some criticism or some journalists who try to do something investigative, these people do not have a big space to speak. And I am following, for example, Makan. So if they bring somebody who try to speak logically, immediately he will be removed, not a lot of, but on the other hand, there is a lot of journalists and unfortunately ministers sometimes, unfortunately sometimes speakers or people who they are invited. Some of the journalists asked to kill 100,000 Palestinian. You are a journalist. This is not your responsibility. Another journalist asked to send, like a minister, a nuclear bomb to Gaza. So these kind of voices, you will see them a lot on the Israeli media. Unfortunately, the positive side, the people who will say, okay, you will go to Rafah, what you will have in Rafah? The same as happened in the north. Even I saw an interview in Channel 13 with the head of the military army, Israeli army in Rafah. And they asked him a question like, okay, what if you go in Rafah, you will finish Hamas? He said, no, because Hamas, since 2 months, we enter Khan Yunis, they are hiding, and we will kill only civilians. We will not kill Hamas people. And this person, immediately they cut the interview with him. I don't know if it is a self-censorship or censura, whatever they call it, from the IDF, but in general, in the Palestinian side, of course, there is a propaganda. I don't say, especially when the reporting of some, let's say, pan-Arab channels with some agendas, but there is evidence in some of the stories, there is videos, there is interviews with people, there is interviews with the, so you can reliable to these things.
Okay,
Please.
thank you. Hossoun, I would like to ask you about misinformation, but also, you know, what you're prioritizing and I would be curious, are you covering the massive student protests or campus protests, I guess I should say, throughout the United States now? How are you reporting on that, and is it moving opinion, or how's it being received by your readers?
First, yes, of course, we are reporting on the pro-Palestine, anti-war movement in the US and also in Europe. You know, our main mission is to provide from the ground in Israel-Palestine. But of course, we also, you know, report on and give analysis to things that are related to Israel-Palestine, as, you know, most of our audience is not here. 50% in the States and the other 50% between Europe and the Middle East. So definitely we report on the persecution and oppression of the pro-Palestine movement in Germany, for example, in France, and some other parts of Europe. The way it's perceived here, and in particular in Gaza, is with very cautious optimism that the world is hearing us. You know, people are cautious because they know that, you know, all these demonstrations, for example, that happened before the Israeli invasion to Rafah could not stop the invasion to Rafah. And they will not be able maybe to stop the war, but at least they will raise awareness about the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza. It's also important to mention that we're also covering the protests in Israel, while most of them are focusing on, asking the Israeli government to sign a deal to free hostages, the Israeli hostages still under captivity in Gaza, in return to Palestinian political prisoners. But some segments of this protest movement is also calling for ceasefire, for ending the occupation, and for starting, a political, some sort of political framework in order to end the occupation and apartheid, and have both the Israelis and Palestinians living hopefully in peace in this land. And we amplify these voices. We amplify voices of families of hostages who are calling for a ceasefire. We amplify voices of parents of soldiers who died in the war in Gaza, calling for a ceasefire and for long-lasting peace and reconciliation. So all these voices are reflected in 972, and perhaps many of the Palestinian independent media outlets and the few Israeli ones as well.
Well, that's really insightful. And before we take questions, because we do, of course, want to take the questions of our participants. Oren, can you mentioned public opinion hardening, but the protests here, the pro-Palestinian protests, and also things like Biden's statement. Well, what are you hearing from your readers? And you also analyze the work of the mainstream media, Haaretz and Yediot and others. So are people siloed? Are they hearing about these protests?
Well, just a remark, Haaretz is, I don't think you can consider it mainstream in Israel. It's very influential, but it's not representative of most of the Israeli Jewish society.
Thank you for correcting.
Those same protests that Husun just described as aspiring hope are covered in Israeli mainstream media as not pro-Palestinian or anti-war, but pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic protests. You take what I can imagine is the very fringe of the speakers there and the demonstrators, and you really focus on that and show them dressed up as an Islamic Jihad terrorist and calling for the destruction of Jews and for Israel and for Jews to go back to Poland or whatever. So they are reported as a threat to the very existence of Israel and as a political incentive for Biden to stop the military aid to Israel. I also want to remark about what Raed said about the propaganda. I don't want to get into an argument about who's having more fake news, but let's just say that both sides are having fake news. And there were instances of rape and atrocities on October 7th. And even though there were exaggerations and false information published, not everything is false. And we have to remember the facts as well.
I have a question here, actually directed to you, Oren, which is, I'm not sure which country the question is coming from, but having experience of standing up to my own government when it's producing the worst war propaganda, I wonder how you're seen by your fellow journalists in Israel, and also just a shout out that it takes courage to push back against one's government, and does.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks. I think as a Jew in Israel, I have more rights than if I was a Palestinian citizen saying the same thing, so I'm not that courageous. Other than that, Haaretz or 972 or myself, they are considered dissident and some would say traitors, but the very loyal voters of Prime Minister Netanyahu would consider the mainstream media as treacherous as well. It's once you're not loyal to the leader, it doesn't really matter if you're Zionist, anti-Zionist, left-wing Zionist, center-left. So the situation is that a lot of the different variety of Israelis are considered unwelcome and even traitors if they don't express full support for our prime minister.
Okay, thank you for that. And this one's for you, Rod. Are you still receiving any kind of financial or technical support from international media developer funders, or how are you sustaining your work to the extent that you can?
Actually, since long time, there is no direct fund to media in Palestine. But lately, let's speak about the war. From 7 months, actually, there is a big crisis in West Bank as well as in Gaza. Of course, the situation in Gaza is completely damages, but here because of no income, actually, from either the international or from the local, because the economic situation is destroyed in West Bank. And as you may hear in the news, the Israeli government is not handing the Palestinian government money. Just here, somebody thinks that this is a donation. No, this is the money, tax money that the Israeli government take it from the Palestinians who import things from Israel or from outside, which called al-Maqasa, and the Israeli government take 5% of that as to collect this amount of money, and every month they have to hand it to the Palestinian government. Since the beginning of the war, and sometimes either, but since the beginning of the war, there is a problem in handing this money. That lead, even the situation in the West Bank is without salary for the like 250,000 Palestinians, employees who work with the Palestinian Authority. And also there is almost 200,000 workers, Palestinian workers who work inside Israel who did not go back to their work, which means in 7 months, there is no income to the Palestinians in general, and that reflects
Right.
the economic, which that lead 50% of our income. On the other hand, most of the international donors that we get from them some small amount from here and there, they stop funding or allocated it or just freezing it for a while. Some of them because they stop at the beginning of the war. There was UN support or not support, so that affect everything. In
Okay,
general,
thank you, Rod. We've
okay,
got
so
about 10 more minutes left or so, and I thank you. I do not want to cut you off, but I just want to get everybody's questions answered. Hassoun, I'm getting a question here from a colleague about whether or not, and maybe you know the answer to this, and perhaps you don't, whether PEN Israel, the international writers, PEN, is playing any role in resisting censorship. Are you seeing any kind of resistance inside of Israel, pushing back against misinformation and in an active public way? Oren talked a moment ago about if you don't toe the party line, you're seen as a traitor. And yet resistance in all its forms is a hard thing for a totalitarian government to suppress, or one that is going to behave in an authoritarian way. So any help from PEN Israel?
Honestly, I didn't hear anything from PEN Israel. I was just last week in Brussels and met with affiliates of PEN in Europe, but I didn't hear anything. So maybe if I'm wrong, maybe Oren will correct me. But I have to say that the level of solidarity between Israeli and Palestinian journalists, independent journalists who are opposing the war, is extremely, extremely high. Like us and the Seventh Eye of Oren, we definitely stand next to each other, and we use the materials of each other. At 972, we translated an amazing analysis by Oren about Al Jazeera 3 months ago. Not only now. We also translated a great article by Anat Saraguski about the way the Israeli coverage of the campus protests is linked very much to how little the Israelis know about what's happening in Gaza, and that's why the coverage is so negative and doesn't see the essence of the protest movement. So that solidarity is high among the independent media outlets who are opposing the war. We are also, we stand in solidarity with all colleagues, of course, in Gaza, and we pay tribute to all those who were killed by the Israeli authorities, and including the 4 Israeli journalists who were killed on October 7th during the Hamas surprise attack on the southern parts of Israel. That solidarity stands also with our colleagues in the West Bank as well, and in East Jerusalem. And I think we need it now more than ever. Yes, the current law that was used to shut down Al Jazeera only talks about foreign media entities, but it could come to us soon, and we will need also support from the international journalist networks all around the world. That is it is really the overall atmosphere in Israel against those who oppose the war, against those who oppose occupation and apartheid, is extremely, extremely dangerous.
So there's nothing like university protests like we're seeing here. You can't be public inside Israel at your university and have a kind of a protest encampment or signage or a speech.
There is a small anti-war movement which is taking part in the demonstrations that you hear about in Tel Aviv every week, sometimes every day. It's tiny little so far. And many of them have been arrested, interrogated, especially during the first few months of the war. The Palestinian citizens of Israel were also persecuted from the first day of the war. Many students were arrested for social media posts. The chief of police from, a few weeks after the start of the war said, anyone who expresses sympathy with Gaza will be put on a bus to Gaza. The Palestinian leadership inside Israel tried to demonstrate in Tel Aviv and in Haifa, and they only got permits to demonstrate inside a few Arab villages. I know that now the student unions, the Arab student unions in Israeli universities requested permits to demonstrate on the anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe, on May 15th. Which comes this year on the same day of Israel's Independence Day, and they were prevented. They didn't get permits from the police. I think some human rights organizations are going to appeal on their behalf to the universities first, and maybe to the court, so they can get permits to demonstrate. So there is an anti-war movement, but it's small. And the big one, which is among the Palestinian citizens of Israel, are being silenced and persecuted. And that's why you don't see it. But we try to amplify it. We even try to amplify these voices who are not being given space in the international media, or of course the Israeli media.
Well, I think you're definitely destination. We must follow you, and because we can access you, we can read the English, we can learn more than our own media has been able to report at times. I'm also wondering if there's any value, this open source intelligence social media network, is that filling in the gaps anywhere in a reliable way when the journalists themselves have been evicted or killed or in some other way, unable to report?
I think this is a totally different discussion about the role of social media, but the trend in Israel and Palestine is the same trend like all over the world. People go to the social media pages that they like, that align with their views. So they will not go and look for social media pages that reflect something different. Al Jazeera, for example, the offices were shut down. But the websites, both in Arabic and English, have been also shut down in Israel. If you go to Al Jazeera from my computer now, you will have no access to the website of Al Jazeera English or Arabic. I still have access, we still have access to their social media pages. Although the Israeli government has, requested Meta and TikTok and Telegram to prevent Al Jazeera from being seen in Israel. I don't know what's happening with that one, but I heard that requests were made to these companies. But I don't believe that somebody who is cheering for this war, who is not standing, actively against the war, will go to Al Jazeera or even 972 or any other social media page. People go to where the content is in line with their views and opinions. So I don't think social media will play a role on that. Social media, just like everywhere else, plays, a big role in distributing misinformation and disinformation.
That's a good point. I'm getting a question from Brazil here, which is, given all of this, for all of you, the frustration, do you think that the journalistic work that we do can influence the outcome of this? Someone else asked, should journalists band together to demand a ceasefire, if I'm reading that rightly? That seems to me to not be the role of journalists unless you're on the editorial page. You're all smiling at that notion. So what about influencing the outcome here? You're smiling about this, right? So maybe you could take this. We're just having to be a little bit succinct because of time. We're beginning to run out of time.
Yeah, as Ghussoon said, now it's not the right time. Nobody listen to you if you are not talking to him with the way. Maybe this is something can come after the war to come back and see and discuss. Even we talk with some Israeli colleagues, especially in Haaretz, and we think that there is a threat to the whole journalist, let's say, who works as a journalist here in both sides, here and there. I spoke to some of the colleagues, and of course they are suffering. So it's not our role now to do this kind of work. It's our role now to give the people the fact as much as possible and to show the other side that, listen, it's not as they said in both sides. There is some people killed who are innocent. There is a humanitarian stories. And this kind of thing, at least, and for sure, not to be part of the propaganda from both sides. I see that there is propaganda here and there, but unfortunately, the propaganda from the one side, which is the Israelis, is supported by strong media internationally. On the other hand, the propaganda of Hamas is supported by some pan-Arabs. So because of that, sorry for that, because of that, I think our role now is limited to tell the truth, try to humanitarian the stories, and of course, maybe in the editorial pieces, we can ask for ceasefire, and we all the time ask for ceasefire.
Okay, well, the work all of you do is so vital, and it just makes me think about opportunities I've had. Sadly, my own translator was killed in Iraq in 2005 by an American soldier. Reporting on that, though difficult, was possible because of access, because I had a place to stay and food and the things that, just the basics that are lacking, and internet connection and these kinds of supports. Journalism doesn't exist like it's not in a vacuum. And you've given us a good picture of the assaults coming from all directions, from everything from munitions to censorship and so you are all heroic in your efforts to bring this to us. And a lot of the people viewing here want to make sure that they can follow you or get in touch with you. And I'm assuming, Devin, is that all going to be on
Yes,
ICFJ's website?
we'll be able to provide information for how to follow our panelists.
Well, I just want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone here who has joined, because I know that all of you are vitally interested in how to do this work, how to support our colleagues, how to keep the flame alive of thinking that we can accurately see what is happening and influence the outcome. And I think that's one of the reasons we get into journalism, is to try to provide better outcomes. And it is frustrating when the work is this hard and this dangerous, but it is so essential. And we know this is the most dangerous conflict to cover. So I just want to thank you all. Just you were speaking to us, Oren, from where are you?
I'm in Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv. I thought you were in Tel Aviv. And Kalsoon, you're in Haifa today. And Rahad, you're in Ramallah. Oh, I think you
Actually, I am in Bethlehem, in the headquarters of Ma'an.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you can at least do those. It was an honor to have this opportunity to speak to all of you. And I just want to thank the ICFJ and each of you, and wish you the best as you continue to, because I know that nobody here is going to be stopping, right?
Jackie, we want to also thank you for being an excellent moderator for this panel, and for your pointed and really insightful questions. Kulsoon, Oren, Rayed, thank you so much for being able to speak with us today. Our network, I'm sure, very much appreciates the insights you were able to give. For everyone still watching, we will have a recap of this up within a week on iGenet.org. And please keep following us. We have more content coming on the iGenet Crisis Reporting Forum in the coming weeks. So please keep an eye out on social media for everything else. Rayed, Jackie, Oren, Kulsoon, thank you again so much. And we will close it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Devin.